Hi, it's Mai here, and this is the first part in my August wrap-up. I thought it might be easier to do this in two parts, so I wouldn't have so many books to talk about at the end of the month. Let's see if I'll only do it this month or continue with it later on. But for now, this is part one, and these are all the books I've read during the first half of August. My August hasn't been that great of a reading month. Most of the stuff that I've read, the books and comics, have been on the 3-star level, so they've been decent and enjoyable. But I'm really wanting something to stand up from the crowd and be a 4 or 5-star read. Right about now, that would be great. But the first thing that I finished was My Man Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse. I've talked about the Jeeves stories quite a lot in my Booktubeathon videos, but this time I read the Reggie Pepper stories to finish the book. So there are some Jeeves stories and some Reggie Pepper stories in this one. Reggie Pepper is sort of a proto-Wooster with no Jeeves. And the Pepper stories aren't quite as developed and polished as the Jeeves ones, but they are good fun. And my favorite was the one with the art thieves. It was this classic misunderstanding story, or this story where people are doing things without the knowledge of what other people are doing, which can be quite a lot of fun. Then I finished the third volume of Unbeatable, Squirrel Girl. Squirrel, you really got me now. I love these titles. This by Ryan North and Erica Henderson. These are always so much fun. I really like the mood and the tone of the Squirrel Girl comics, and I like how colorful the art is. In this one there was the added bonus of Dr. Doom featuring a lot in this. For some reason I always find Doom to be really hilarious. I think it has to do with how seriously he takes himself and how he speaks. And in this volume there's a lot of Doom, and Doom was even more hilarious than usual. And this was a great fun volume of Squirrel Girl, once again. Then I also finished another Marvel comic trade. I read Patsy Walker, A.K.A. Hellcat, Volume 1, Hooked on a Feline. And this tells of Patsy Walker, who wants to start this temp agency or work agency for people with superpowers who want to do regular jobs. Of course, there are a lot of villains making things complicated, and also just her trying to live her life and make enough money for rent. You might know Patsy from the Jessica Jones TV series on Netflix, but this version is quite different. This is more upbeat, more quirky and whimsical. There was this one issue especially that was my favorite, where Patsy called a lot of these Marvel women together. I especially loved that Squirrel Girl Kate and America popped by. I love Kate and America because I love the Young Avengers comics. It was so great to see these Marvel superhero women just hanging out together, having shakes and burgers. I gave this volume 3.5 stars. It was fun and colorful. I still like Squirrel Girl better. This is also a very fun comic with fun characters. Next, I finished reading something quite different. I finished Swords and Deviltry by Fritz Leiber and... Fritz Lieber. I don't know German. I should have checked this out beforehand. Anyway, this is the first Lankmar book, the first Farfod and Grey Mouser book, which is this classic sword and sorcery duo. The name Sword and Sorcery comes from this author. This is the first book in which we see how these two met. There's one story first of Farfod's teenage years, and then another of the Grey Mousers, and then the story where they two get together and meet for the first time in Lankmar. And I don't know if this was the greatest way to start as a new reader, because these aren't in the publication order. These are in the inner chronology order, so there had been a lot of adventures of these two beforehand that Lieber had written, that this has collected the chronologically first. I think it would have been much more interesting to first know these characters through their more epic adventures and then learn about their childhood, because right now I wasn't invested in these characters. I didn't know who they were, so reading about them as young men didn't feel that important for me. I think it would have been more interesting if I had read something else first. If I had known this beforehand, I probably wouldn't have picked up the first book in the series first. But yeah, there were 3 stories, and the first, I have no idea what to make of it. It tells of Farfod's life in this northern clan. They are like these sort of, not quite Vikings, but this sort of northern barbarians. It was about this village where the women are sort of against men. They are against the men because one time a year or a couple of times a year an acting troupe comes into town and they put on a show where only men can attend, and there are like naked women performing. So apparently the women are so mad from this that they are in a constant state of near war with the men. It was just weird. There's just the men's side of the town and the women's side of the town, and women pelt the men with snowballs, and they do magic and weird ice magic. And if they catch a man, they will beat him up or something. I don't know. It was just so weird. I had no idea what to think of it, and I wasn't a fan of that one. The second story, featuring the Grey Mouse's teenage years, was a lot better. In the beginning of that, he returns from a quest that this wizard that has been teaching him has sent him on, and he returns and finds the wizard dead and his house ruined and burnt down. So he is set for revenge against the Lord of the Lands, who hates magic. That was a lot more interesting for me. The third one, with the two together, was nice and had some fun bits, but it employed some sword and sorcery tropes that are super tired today. Perhaps when he did them, they weren't that used. But yeah, it involves both of these guys' girlfriends. Both of these women are introduced in the first and second short stories, and they also meet when the two meet, and then stuff happens having to do with the Thieves Guild and Wizard once again. I could pretty much know how the story goes because of sword and sorcery tropes. But I gave this book 3 stars. There were things that I enjoyed and things that I didn't enjoy, like the first story. I still don't know what I think about that one. I didn't like it. Oh yeah. Then I read the third book in the Dark is Rising series, the final one from this bind-up. I finally finished this bind-up, and it is the Greenwitch, and these are by Susan Cooper. In this one, the characters from the first book and the second book meet. So in the first one there were these 3 siblings, and in the second one there was this guy Will, who learns that he is one of the old ones. The characters from these 2 books meet, and they are once again in the setting of the first book, and there's this weird village tradition of the Green Witch going on, where they built this witch from different flowers and vines and leaves. I really like the tradition aspect of this. I think the Green Witch things were lovely done. I think if I had read this as a kid, it would have been hella creepy. But for now, it was just okay. There are once again the forces of the dark trying to meddle in things and steal the items that they have found in the first book and things like that. And the kids have to stop this from happening. It was nice to see all the characters together, but I gave this one 3 stars. It was a fun children's book. I will continue on and read the last 2 books in the second bind-up that I own quite soon, and then I have finally finished this series. I don't know why I didn't read it as a kid, because I read other books by Susan Cooper and I really liked those. But anyway, next I finished Etiquette and Espionage by A.K.A. This is the first finishing school book, and this is a reread for me. I read this earlier quite a long time ago, but I never finished the series, and now I'm buddy reading with a couple of booktubers, and I'm currently reading the second book, Curses and Conspiracies. All in all, I felt the same as I did the first time I read this. I'm not that into this series as I am in the Parasol Protectorate series, because I like the characters in Parasol Protectorate more, and I think the plots are more interesting. In this one, the characters are in their early teens. They are 13, 14-year-olds. They can get a bit tiring at times, and they are in this finishing school that not only teaches them etiquette, but also espionage, like the name says, and different things about poisons and a lot of interesting things. The thing that I most like in this is Gail Carriger's wittiness, her writing style, and all the little cameos and callbacks to the Parasol Protectorate, even though this series happens, chronologically speaking, before the Parasol Protectorate. This was written after. There are a few characters from the Parasol Protectorate as young people in this one, which is quite interesting. And one thing I also like, that there's this boys' school called the Bunsons, which has this group of these horrible aristocratic brats called the Pistons. So it's this sort of gentleman's aristocratic club in the boys' school, and they are this sort of Byronic dandy goth steampunkers. I like that this is in the steampunk universe, but these people are the only people that have like cogs on their clothes that serve no purpose whatsoever. So they kind of like have a top hat with a cog on it for decoration, and they wear coal on their eyes and try to be very tragic. But they really deport themselves like some sort of frat boys or something. They like to invade parties and spiked punch and things like that. They are quite annoying, but for some reason I find them very entertaining. And next I read another comic straight. I read 2 volume. Which one is this? 11, The Last Suppers. 2 has been always quite steady 3 stars for me. Some of them have been 4 stars, some of them 2 stars, depending on how I feel when I read them. The tone of 2 is quite consistently quite funny, with a lot of drama and a bit of gore, because this tells of a federal agent with the ability to get psychic impressions from what he eats. This, of course, being volume 11, I'm not going to tell you what this is about, but I would have liked this more if there wasn't this thing. This whole volume teased a plot element that I hate, so it took a lot of my enjoyment out of reading this volume, because I was just expecting when this thing will happen that I really don't care about. But at the end, the ending was really entertaining, and I wasn't expecting it at all. It didn't go like I expected, so I did like the ending, and I'm really curious to what happens next, even though I only gave this one 2.5 stars, because like I said, teasing that plot element really took my enjoyment out of reading this, and I sort of was reading it without wanting to, because I didn't want a thing to happen, because I find it lazy and annoying. Anyway, let's move on. And the final thing that I read that I'm going to go through in this part is Spock Must Die, the first ever Star Trek novel that isn't a novelization of an episode, and this by James Blish, this from the 70s. In this one, Spock and Scotty mess with the transporter, because that is so safe. I think it was built the way it was for a reason. But anyway, they do some adjustments to how it works, and they end up with 2 Spocks. One Spock goes into the transporter chamber, and then they suddenly have 2 identical Spocks that both claim to be the original. I did find that part of the story really fun. About halfway through, I think they realize which Spock is the real one and which isn't. After that, the book isn't as enjoyable. I really liked having these 2 Spocks around and having these people try to decide which one is which, and Spock having really so much trouble with 2 of him being around. And also there were some great ideas about the transporter being thrown about, and in all it was a lot more interesting before they figured out which one was which. But at the end, I wasn't really interested in what was happening. And also, since this was written in the 70s, like I feared, there were some sexist and racist elements in this. I think a lot worse than in the Star Trek TV series, the original series. The original series isn't perfect in this regard. Like, quite often these women aren't believed. Like, poor Rand isn't believed when she sees something and reports, and they are like, "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" or something like that. You just imagined it, but it wasn't as bad as in this one. In this one, the author felt like he had to put down his own ideas as to why women like Spock, and he made it so that Kirk himself is thinking about these things, and it really ruins Kirk's character to have him think these things. Oh, these white women still have vestiges of racism from 200 years ago, and liking Spock is a thing that is safer for them than liking other races from Earth. And it was so clearly something that the author had been thinking about himself to try to justify why a lot of women fancied Spock so much. And it was just so horrible and unnecessary. After that, it was just straight back in the plot. Why are they 2 Spocks? But I had to read this 2-page spread about how come these women can work with Kirk and Bones so easily without like getting romantically involved in them, and then this theory about ladies and Spock that for some reason Kirk was thinking about. No, just no. For some reason it reminded me of a comic that is completely unrelated to this, which is Bakuman Volume 1, which is written and drawn by the same people who did Death Note. I only read the first volume, and there was also this completely unnecessary spread about how women can never understand men's dreams, and men have ambition. They want to really be mangakas in this comic, but this one girl only wants to be a voice actress because it gives her something to do until she gets married. And it was just so unnecessary that I stopped reading the comic series. I was just like, one volume, I'm done. I don't know who they think are interested in these theories of theirs, so that was the same thing that bothered me with this one. And since the ending wasn't that exciting, I gave this one 2 stars. I gave both of those stars for the 2 Spocks. Well, actually I gave both of those stars for the first half, if you take the racism and sexism off. Yeah. There were also some other things that I felt like didn't feel like something the characters would do or say. But that's the thing with a lot of tie-in novels, that some authors can't get the characters completely down. So that's the thing I read. So those are all the things that I read in August so far. I haven't finished anything after these because I'm having a hard time concentrating on reading for some reason. Even though I want to read, I am having a really hard time concentrating. So I'm just like a third of the way, halfway through a couple of books. And let's see how many books I'll have for the second part. For now, I'll just gonna say bye, and I'll see you all next time.